This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, a continuity of business solution for industries that struggle with traditional banking. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Today, I am really excited because we are talking to Zuby. He is a very popular rapper out of the UK, and he just finished up a lengthy 9-week trip to the United States. And he's kind of an interesting guy. He is not typical of what I think you would think of when you think of a hip hop or a rap artist. So I'd like to welcome to the show, Zuby. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How you doing?
Great. I do appreciate taking the time. Are you recovered now? It seemed like you had a pretty big whirlwind trip to the U.S.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as saying I'm recovered, but I'd say that I'm recovering.
Well, that's good. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was amazing. Absolutely incredible trip. Life-changing.
Was that the first time you'd been to the States?
No, I've been to the States 5 times before, but it was my first time going in 10 years, and it was also the first time going for career purposes. So I managed to really make the most of it. I'd never been out there for so long, with the exception of New York City. All the cities that I visited, I'd never actually been to before. So that was all brand new.
So what did you think? So what did you learn on your trip about American culture, going to all those different cities?
Well, firstly, I learned that it's probably easier to view the USA almost like a continent more than just a single country in some ways, because the variances between the states and cities are so big. First of all, you've got the different time zones, which you don't have somewhere like the UK or most other countries. You've got different climates, very big range of temperature and different types of weather, range of different laws, cultures, accents, types of people. Everything's pretty different depending on where you go. I mean, even the difference between going from somewhere like San Francisco to Dallas, and then to Atlanta, and then to DC, and then to New York, they're all really different places. So I guess I already knew that. I wouldn't say I learned it, but I saw just to how far an extent the places vary from city to city and state to state. I also learned that a lot of people there know who I am, which I didn't necessarily expect. I had a lot of incidents where I was in, various places in public in the different cities, and I had people come up to me and recognize me or thank me for my work, or, just say that they like what I do. And that's, that's something I get from time to time in the UK, depending on where I am, because I get people who recognize me for my music. But to be in places that I'd never been to before and to have that happen, it really showed me the impact that I'm having, not just locally, but on an international level. So that was really, really encouraging. So yeah, those are a couple of things.
Fame is an interesting thing. I'm not quite famous, but I know a lot of famous people, and that rise and getting accustomed to it, is kind of like, it's like, from what they've told me, is you have to like kind of grow into it because you're not used to it at first.
Mm-hmm.
I used to live in Ireland. I actually studied over there and worked over there, a long time ago, probably before you were born at this point. But I was, it's kind of interesting, and obviously, Ireland's a lot smaller than, the Republic's a lot smaller than the UK. But it's like, when I tried to explain to my friends that were Irish that had never been to the United States, I said, no offense, this is not me being, kind of like this ugly American, but your entire country is smaller than my state. And we have like 50 more of them. And mine, I originally came from Michigan, the Detroit area is where I grew up. I live out west in Utah now, Salt Lake City, Utah. And what, and they get like kind of offended. And I said, you really don't understand until you like really come to our country. The United States is not a homogeneous culture. It's not a homogeneous continent. It is that's not a continent, but you know what I'm saying? It's a country, and it's very different all the way around. And I always like to see people's perspectives that have, spent time here to see, holy crap. Yeah. It's not, there isn't just like this one television stereotypical American thing, right? There's very, very big differences between the different states, and even within a state. On top of that, Texas is very different between, Houston and Dallas, even the people.
Yeah, I didn't make it out to Houston, unfortunately, but I went to Austin, Dallas, and Fort Worth.
Do you have a favorite, or do you want to not say? Of all the places you go, what was your favorite place?
My favorite state would have been Texas, probably, just in general. But I liked most of the cities I visited in terms of like it depends on what level. In terms of opportunities and just cool stuff happening, like the most cool stuff happened in Los Angeles, but I would probably not want to live there, for example. I think places like Nashville and Austin and Dallas and Fort Worth are a lot more livable than LA, than New York, than San Francisco. But it really depends on what you're after. I mean, I went there primarily to do a bunch of interviews and had podcast invitations and just opportunities for all the stuff that I do. So I primarily hit some of the major cities. I didn't make it out to all of them. I would certainly like to in the future. But yeah, I guess asking favorite is kind of a tricky one. But I did really like Texas there. I just felt like I like the vibe there. I like the people. I think on that wavelength in some ways. Texas is one of those places, to be honest. I kind of liked it before I'd ever been to it. I know a lot of people from there. I know quite a bit about the state and stuff like that. And it always just struck me as somewhere that I did really want to visit because I always seem to, whenever I meet people from Texas, I always seem to like them and get on with them and be on some similar wavelength. So I found the same thing when I was out there for a couple of weeks.
Well, I think you hit on something that's very interesting, that you went and did a lot of interviews and you got on some really major ones. I mean, Joe Rogan and some of these other, big conservative podcasts.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that really intrigued me, about you is, okay, you got this English guy, right? So usually off the bat, English guys are going to typically be more on the American spectrum, at least politically, a little more left leaning. And then, you're black or person of color, and typically then that's also going to be generally by American standards, they tend to lean a little more left. And then you're in hip hop and rap, and that also tends to be very left leaning, but you're not.
Yeah, all those things you said, I don't even know if that's really the case.
Fair enough.
I think it appears that way. I don't think it's really the case.
It certainly seems that way.
It does seem that way, yeah, for a lot of reasons.
Uh,
And it might lean that way in some aspects, but in a lot of other ways, I don't really think it does. I just think there's that illusion.
And so, but the illusion's prevalent. It's out there.
Yeah, sure. It's
And so you went on a lot of these really conservative talk shows, and so I guess I just need to get this out there. Are you a Republican?
I'm not even American.
I know. But but you would consider yourself a conservative, politically at least.
On some stuff, sure. I don't label myself. What people want to label me, I don't mind. I don't personally label myself because, well, for a whole bunch of reasons. Because people have different meanings and interpretations and presumptions that come with certain labels. So I prefer to let anybody else label me. If people want to know my certain views on certain things, I'm happy to explain them and express the epistemology behind my thinking and my conclusions. But yeah, I don't mind being called a conservative. I don't mind being called libertarian. I probably don't mind being called a traditional or classical liberal. I mean, depending on who you talk to, all these labels can mean quite different things. I mean, even the definitions between liberal and conservative, even between the UK and the US, there's a bit of a variance. So yeah, I mean, if I were in the USA, I would certainly be more along the lines of Republicans on most issues, but I generally just, from thing to thing, issue to issue, I'm not sort of totally down one line or the other, and I don't believe most people are. I think that's just kind of the binary thinking and sort of team thinking that can occur when there's only two sort of viable options. Then people seem okay, they need to either totally align down this way or totally align down that way. But I mean, something I said on Joe Rogan, right? I said it's funny because we live in a time where people are saying that politics is binary, but gender is a spectrum, right? So yeah, I think the whole idea that it's either left or right or red or blue is, yeah, people talk a lot about social constructs. I do think that's kind of a genuine social construct. So I certainly lean conservative on some issues. I would also lean certainly not in the sort of weird, hyper woke, progressive leftist sense, liberal, but in terms of like the normal liberal sense, I'm also liberal on certain issues. It just depends on what it is and what I think makes sense and what I think is moral and ethical and correct, and also what works.
I think that's a good point. What works and what doesn't.
Mm.
I mean, you're not shy about your political views on anything. In fact, you can be very controversial, things you post on Twitter and things. And I mean, you even reference in conservative icon Jordan Peterson in your music. So you definitely bring politics up, and they tend to be, by a lot of people's standards, more right wing, at least in the United States. Do you think that helps or hurts your career in any way?
It seems to have helped. um, if I'm going by the past 365 days, I'd certainly say it's helped. I mean, I'm not someone whose politics have changed significantly. I mean, I put out my first album in 2006, and even before I was making music, my views have not shifted much. I've probably shifted on maybe like 2 or 3 issues in the past 15 years, and I'm not even someone who I don't know. A lot of people view me through a political lens, but I think I'm only interested in politics kind of on the high level, the big idea level. I'm not really so interested in it on the party level. So that's why you won't see me tweeting a lot about like specific parties or specific politicians or even Brexit and stuff like that. The nitty gritty of it kind of bores me, but the overarching ideas and ideals that runs alongside culture and morality and psychology and religion and other stuff that I think is a lot more interesting. And it's hard to talk about some of those aspects of society and humanity, either as individuals or as groups, without it crossing over into politics. That's just kind of natural.
So, from a high level, do you think culture, at least Western culture, is going the right direction right now with this whole woke thing? And
No,
it,
no,
why do you think it's going?
absolutely not. Not even, not a smidgen.
Where's it going? Where are we going? I guess that's the question, because I have my own opinions, and I don't think I disagree with you on that many things either. But where do you think we're headed right now with the current state of affairs in the West?
Well, I think a lot of people are trying to drive it off a cliff, and and I think that it's important for the moderate and sensible people to do their part to contain that. That's one of the reasons why in the past year, it seems like to a lot of people, it seems like I've suddenly become a lot more vocal and outspoken. And that's why, because there comes a stage where you can't really just sit back and acquiesce and just watch, because a lot of people who I think are trying to push things in the wrong direction, they're not going to shut up. They're very loud. They're very bold. They're very vocal. So you need people who are more reasonable and more logical and more rational and have a better grasp on certain things, or at least an alternative opinion, to also be able to have that conversation and to join up. And if you see something that's going on out there, whether that's in your school, your workplace, online, offline, and you see something is going in a really bad direction in either way, in any direction, then it's important to, not just shut up and let it happen, because that's how bad things take place, right? So it's important to sort of balance that out and to make sure that the communication channels stay open. It's why I love podcasts. It's why I love being able to have these discussions with people, because as long as people are talking, they're not fighting. It's why I don't like the idea of censorship. I don't like the sort of deplatforming or the silencing of voices on social media, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that concerns me, because all that was going to do is polarize people further. People think it's a solution because it might look like a solution in the short term, but in the long term, I do think that's going to create far more problems than it's going to potentially solve. And I don't think a lot of people have the foresight nor the understanding of history nor human psychology to really get why that's the case. They think that if you kind of take someone off Twitter, that person no longer exists, or their ideas no longer exist and stuff like that. And what is likely to happen in reality is, by ostracizing that person and completely excluding them from the conversation, firstly, I'm not sure if that's moral or ethical or even legal in some cases. But then, you know, you're kind of pushing them into the hands of people who are potentially a lot more extreme and would love to get their hands on someone who feels like society or these platforms or whatever have ostracized them. And, you know, I'd rather have bad ideas out in the open than have them hidden and silenced, because if an idea is really bad or it's really unethical or it really doesn't have any support, then you shouldn't fear it being voiced, because as long as you have people who are willing to push back against it, then you can just expose that idea for what it is. That's the way I look at it.
Well, they say sunshine is the best disinfectant,
Hmm.
and I don't know who said that, but I do believe that to be the case. And I think with this outrage culture, and the thing is, I'm an American, and this outrage culture is getting really scary to me, where we just want to, shut somebody down and take away their rights. And,
Hmm.
obviously polls can be a little dubious at times, but, the polls seem to be indicating that a lot of, at least on the millennial side, support getting rid of the First Amendment. And of course, they all hate the Second Amendment too. But,
Hmm.
and that to me is just, I kind of blame, government education has been a complete failure. We don't teach critical thinking. We don't teach, logic and rhetoric, and we don't teach, history. And I think you touched on this a little bit. That gets into a little bit about this anger. I think it's almost like our culture has been deliberately, like, keeps stoking this anger in our society right now, at least in the States, since this last political, since Trump came to office over the last
Sure.
couple of years. I'm 47, and so I've been through a lot of administrative, changes in presidential elections over my life. And the one thing I always saw that was different, what's different about the Trump presidency, and I'm not a fan of Trump personally, I didn't vote for him, but what I think is interesting is that typically after you have a changing of an administration, people are, a little butthurt and disappointed for a week or two
Hmm.
after that election happens.
Hmm.
It's never not been butthurt since he got elected. It's
Yep.
never died down. It seems
It's
like the
ridiculous.
media, it keeps festering. And it's funny because I think he's just as obnoxious as, I think he's completely obnoxious, and I can
Hmm.
understand why what he says pisses people off.
Hmm.
But if you actually look at what he votes for, and I'm a big believer that I hate politicians, what they say. I don't like what they say. I don't listen to what they say. I look
Hmm.
at what they do. What laws do they sign? What power do they actually change and enact? And really, from one president to another, the really important policies really don't change very much, but yet the rhetoric around it does.
Sure.
And if you look at what Trump does, he's not really done anything very much different than the Obama administration. He keeps doubling down on the debt and things like that. Those are the things that I care about. What do they actually do? But so this anger is interesting, and a lot of times that anger spills over into culture. And one of the things about what I think is interesting about your music is that your music isn't angry. It seems like
Oh, no, not at all.
you really push a really positive message, I think, and more of an empowering message,
Hmm.
which is kind of different than what a lot of hip hop artists are really doing. And why do you focus on the positive? Well, I mean, it seems like if so many people in this industry, in this genre of music, are more negative, why are you a positive guy?
Well, because I am a positive guy naturally. And also, there's so much negativity out there that why would I want to contribute to that more? That's not what people need. People need encouragement. People need positivity. People need to feel emboldened and empowered to improve themselves, to go after their dreams, to be better people for themselves, for their families, for society, everything like that. So why would I want to go and preach murder, death, kill, and all this stuff when I can put out a positive message? I mean, I've only got so many words to work with in a song. So if I can make a song that's going to make you feel aggressive and want to go and I don't want to make music that people commit drive-bys to. Let's keep it real. Firstly, that's not my background, right? I want to make music that people set gym records to. I want to make music that people feel inspired to I don't know, go out and get a new job or be successful or start a business or whatever it is, man. Anything positive, even just to believe in themselves a little bit more. There's so much negativity out there in the world, not just in music, but in general, man. There's so much negativity out there. You turn on the news, what do they say? If it bleeds, it leads, right? news is just constant fear, fear mongering. So I don't watch the news. I don't own a television. I don't read newspapers. It's just negativity, fear, fright, like awful stuff. And it never ends. It's the same, even in entertainment, in lots of music, not all music, but in some music. And, it's just, yeah, I mean, and life is a balance. But like I say, there's so much negative out there already. And I feel that the negative currently outweighs the positive. So I'm not interested in my legacy being someone who contributed just more negativity into the world. So from the very beginning, I was like, okay, I'm not going to take that path. I'm not going to rap about that song. I'm not going to rap about those topics. I'm not going to put profanity in my music. I'm not going to use the N word in my music, all that stuff. I mean, firstly, that's not who I am in real life. And I'm not going to fabricate to pretend I'm something in my music that I'm not in reality. You can go back and listen to all my songs over the last 13 years. Everything you'll hear there is consistent with what I'm saying now. That's never changed. So yeah, I mean, those are the main reasons. So a combination of, my own background, how I was raised, my own personality, my own message, my own mission with what I'm trying to achieve with my music. I say my goal is I want my words to have a positive impact on over 10 million people. So through my music, through my interviews, through my podcast, public speaking, anything I do, I want to be able to die and say, cool, there's 10 million people on earth or more who, if you say Zuby to them, they'll be like, okay, cool. Yeah, I like that guy. Or he had some kind of positive impact or motivation or inspiration in my life. That's really where my head's at. That's where my heart is.
So in preparing for this interview, which actually, believe it or not, I did, I was listening to some of your songs, right? I wanted to get a feel for it. And I was listening to Perseverance and I was listening to Glory. And I said to my wife, I was listening, she's like, what are you listening to? I'm like, I'm going to talk to this guy. I want to see what he's saying. And I'm like, his rap is different. And it's funny because I got I actually am old school. So I actually have NWA and some Eminem and stuff, in my own music library. And I said, his rap reminds me of like self-help hip hop.
Okay, yeah.
Seriously. And I go, this is kind of interesting because it wasn't like I got little kids and I'm like, I can't even listen to my own rap albums in my house, sure. Right? Because I don't want my kids hearing some of that NWA stuff, right? Old Eazy-E, right? But I said, it's interesting that, you're breaking a mold as far as I can see. I mean, I'm not going to try to BS. I'm not the super hip hop guy, right? I'm just not. Yeah, sure. I'm into all sorts of things, but you are breaking a mold. There's not a lot of hip hop artists that are really kind of focusing on that positive and I don't know, keeping it PG-13, so to speak. So do you, and I respect that, right? You are doing something different. So I'm talking to you and not trying to talk some other guy because I can't stand a lot of the guys out there that are just mumble rapping around. And so the question I would have for you, do you think that breaking that mold actually is helping your career, or do you think it would hinder it? Like, has anybody ever come up to you and said, hey, if you get a little more raw on this thing, we'll sign you and you'll get bigger? Or do you think that you're going on the path that you want and with the trajectory that you want because you're breaking a mold?
Yeah, man. I'm not someone who sacrifices my principles and my ethics for short-term gain in anything. That's just not how I roll. I'm not someone who bends to appease other people. You were asking before about some of my socio-political views. You're asking about my music. With everything, I'm consistent with who I truly am. And if my goal were to just make a lot of money or simply become famous or whatever, there's other things I would be doing. If my goal were to maximize my income, I wouldn't have left a job as a management consultant to become a professional musician, especially independently, right? Whenever someone says I'm in it for money, I'm like, are you insane? Like I would be like, I took a huge pay cut to become a full-time musician. But in the long term, with the way my vision is and with what my goal is, it's like, yeah, this is the path that I need to walk. And it might take a while for the world to kind of get it, but I'm not going to change my entire message or even my entire genre or type of music or something to whatever might be currently popular on the radio for 6 months, just to try to win over some people who aren't really my real fans anyway. I figure by being myself, by being true to myself, both in my music, outside of my music, on social media or whatever, not everybody's going to like it. And I'm happy with not everybody liking what I do or not even liking me. That took me, a little bit of time to accept and kind of get used to, because when you first start out in music, you kind of want everybody to like you, and you don't want to rock the boat too much because you don't want to unsettle people or polarize people or anything like that. But as I've gotten older, as I've gotten more experienced, as I've gained a better understanding of what it is that I myself believe in and what I'm not willing to compromise on or waver on or whatever, and as I've felt more emboldened to and felt it more necessary to voice some of that, what's happened is my audience has grown 15, 20x this year. Since February, I've gained hundreds of thousands of fans just this year. And that came from me just continuing to be authentic. So I haven't changed. It's just that, it took a while for the world to come around to it and for the message to be particularly powerful, right? A lot of the stuff I say, I think, whether that's in interviews or that's on social media or whatever, I think a lot of it would have been considered. I feel the same way. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier. I feel the same way about him, right? I think a lot of the stuff he says, 15 years ago would have been considered common sense or maybe a little bit mundane or banal or something. It's like, yeah, of course you should clean your room and work on yourself first. But in 2018, 2019, these messages have become somewhat lost in modern Western society. So it's necessary again to say some stuff which may almost seem obvious and, and seem commonsensical. And there are so many people who are afraid to say that stuff, right? And so by someone being willing to stick their neck out and say some of the things that other people aren't willing to, not for the sake of being controversial or causing problems or just trolling or triggering people or whatever, with an actual reason behind it, then I found a lot of people gravitate to that because a lot of people feel like they can't speak up or they can't necessarily articulate things in the way they'd like to be able to. A comment I get a lot now, both in real life and online, is people kind of saying, man, you say things in a way that I feel or I agree with, but I can't articulate and express them in the way that you are able to. And really that's what writing music is even about. Being a songwriter, if you were to ask me what makes a good songwriter or a good rapper, I'd say it's someone who's able to articulate things in a way that people relate to and connect with in a way that most people can't. Comedians do the same thing, right? They take stuff that's the funniest comedy, when it's stuff that you've kind of thought that way or you felt that thing before, but you wouldn't have been able to put it together in the way that comedian just did.
It's funny. I have a really, really dark sense of humor, very sarcastic. And I've actually been looking at doing some funny kind of stand-up stuff. And some of the stuff, my wife just looks at me. She's like, you can't say that in public. And I'm like, but they're all thinking it too.
Yeah.
And I think, they say, tell people the truth. That's great. But make sure you make them laugh or they're going to kill you. And I think, right. And I think that's where we are right now. And I'm very, I don't care anymore where I am. I mean, I say stuff on Twitter that gets me pissed off or people pissed off at me because, it's funny because on most social issues, I'm very liberal on how I think government should interact with people. But I think personally, I live a very conservative life. I just, I'm like, for instance, I think people, if they want to do drugs. But on the other hand, I think it's just a bad idea. So I tell my kids not to do drugs. But I don't think the state being involved with that helps the situation. In fact, it usually creates more problems. And, and the one thing that's interesting, and it's all on this election cycle. And I think it's because so much of the American media is, I don't know, straight up communist at this point. I don't know how to define it. But pretty much everybody on the left running for president is communist, is all I can see. And I know a lot about, and I don't say that, I read history. I just finished a book about the Finnish War, and I just finished a book called Red Famine, which talks about, what happened in the Ukraine during the Soviet empire. And so I read history, right? It's not like, and it's funny. And even if you read Gulag Archipelago, which I definitely, if you can get through it, it's a really enlightening book.
Yeah, I'm about a third of the way through it.
volume 1 or 2?
Oh, I've actually got the like, I guess you'd call it abridged, the
Yeah.
one where they've put the whole thing together. So I'm actually listening to it as an audiobook.
Yeah, and it's lengthy, but it's interesting because when I started reading that and um, listening to the language and how people were, basically the recounting of how the propaganda was in the Soviet Union, and then you just turn on CNN
Mm,
and listen to any of these people running for office, and they're literally saying the same thing, and they're
that's nuts.
demonizing kulaks. Billionaires are the kulaks, but the fact
Yeah.
is when they say billionaire, they mean anyone making $200,000 a year.
Hmm.
That's a kulak. And it's funny because it's the same playbook, almost verbatim. It's not even unique, but we don't even teach history in this country, so
Yeah.
people don't even know any different. That this is just a repeat. It's a rerun. It's a do-over.
Do you think the people saying it even know that it's a rerun? I don't think so.
I
I'd be
would
surprised.
say, well, I would say like the Bernie Sanders type absolutely does, because
Mm,
he spent time in the Soviet Union.
yeah, sure.
So I think he probably does, and I think he's probably a true believer. I
Mm,
think some of the other ones are just they're just pawns trying to get power, and they'll say
yeah.
whatever they're told to say by their handlers. Um, but I think the thing that kind of scares me right now is that these kids are like, anywhere from 20 to 30 seems to be, they're just espousing this communism, this socialism, and that they're all victims. And
Hmm.
it's funny, and I just say, look, I'm not a billionaire, like I'm not a rich dude, you know but I can say that if you're going to blame your life's failures, it's not Bezos' fault, or it's not Bill Gates' fault. You're
No,
struggling.
no,
It's not.
they've made life better for you. In fact,
Yeah, it's always people on their iPhones, on
of course,
Twitter, on their Microsoft computer, and they're
of course.
complaining. I mean, and part of that's just they're young. I mean, I get it, but
Hmm.
I grew up poor, so I know what that looks like, and really, and I just posted a tweet earlier today that talked a little bit like, look, I grew up poor. My parents made bad decisions with money. I was raised to be financially illiterate. I didn't understand personal management, personal
Hmm.
finance. And but I never blamed anybody else. I blamed my parents when I was
Hmm.
angry and young, but
Yeah, sure,
I
sure.
didn't blame rich people. I said, I wanted to learn from them, because I wanted to, back then. I said, hey, look, I knew even when I was in high school, I don't want to have my life like it is right now. And what do I need to do to get better? And I looked for mentors to help me, and I looked for books, and I read books on personal finance and small business, and where I am today is in a much different standard of living than when I grew up with. And it was because I made it, and
Yeah,
and
good for
it,
you.
it was hard. It was hard. And
As it's supposed to be.
yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't think you become strong growing up being a victim. I think
No.
and the thing is, when people, and this is where politicians I think are pretty smart, is that if they make people that are failures or people that are struggling, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean,
Hmm.
everyone fails. I've failed more than I've been successful in my life. But
Hmm.
but going back to your song Perseverance, and this is what I like that song, is
Thank
that
you.
you got to keep getting back up. You got to
Of
keep
course.
doing it. And, you're an overnight success, like 15 years in the making. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's like how many, and I'm gonna bet, without even knowing all the stuff you went through, how many times were probably people told you, why are you quitting your job to be a musician? I'm gonna
Hmm.
bet you had people like
Hmm.
questioning that decision
Yeah, of
making
course, of course.
process.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've had people do the same thing when I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
Right. Like, well, how can you just not have a paycheck every week? And I'm like, look, I don't want to be a slave to a paycheck,
Sure.
because if you get a paycheck, that's all you're going to make.
Yeah. No,
Why would you limit yourself that way?
it's always lonely. I mean, I always feel some kind of bond between artists and entrepreneurs because it's a lonely path, because that's only a relatively small percentage of the population. It's always going to be a minority, and it probably should be. But there are so many things people go through, whether it's starting a business or doing something creative, whether that's acting, singing, being a rapper, or doing both of them combined, as I do. And yeah, there are certain things that are it's hard to explain to someone else who isn't also or hasn't also been on that same kind of journey. I mean, it's a whole different mentality. The highs are higher, the lows are lower, and just having that ultimate feeling of, yeah, man, this is totally on me. I mean, any success I get, cool. Like I'm taking credit for that.
You didn't make
But
that, right?
yeah,
That's you
yeah,
know,
but
a friend of mine just got his first Ferrari. Now it's not
nice.
even a new Ferrari; it was a used
Okay.
Ferrari. But he's an entrepreneur. Him and his wife I've known for a long time. They started their business 15, 16 years ago now.
Hmm.
They now currently employ over 60 people. They created 60 jobs. They pay
Hmm.
above minimum wage, and some of the jobs are like entry level, non-skilled kind of jobs.
Hmm.
He just bought his first Ferrari. Like it wasn't even that much,
Yeah,
considering
yeah.
what a new Ferrari can cost. And it's funny when he posted pictures of it, and I said, "Dude, virtual high five." But I was surprised at how many people were negative about that
Hmm.
and we're like shitting. I'm like, dude, that guy, because I worked in his store with him, and when he was younger, and they only had one store, and I have 3 retail locations,
Yeah.
and I literally was in there when he was helping putting in his floors because he's putting in his own floors for his
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
store. I mean, and you're like, dude, this guy worked his ass off 50, 60, 100 hours a week for like a decade before they
Hmm.
really started making money, and
Yep.
now they've created jobs for people that wouldn't have had him otherwise. And now to celebrate, he's got enough money that he can pay cash for, it's not even that expensive a car, but
Yeah,
less than
sure,
100
sure.
grand.
Yeah.
And the people, it was funny and sad at the same time how
Hmm.
many people would shit on that.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me anymore. It does not surprise me. I mean, again, I've been doing music since 2006, and one reason I've been able to be so resilient and I guess astute in some ways this year for people who are kind of seeing me for the first time is it's like this isn't new. It's just the volume's gone up, right? Like I've been dealing with both on the love side and on the hate side, right? Having people, whether that's people recognize you in public or want your autograph or hating on you on some internet forum or talking smack on you on YouTube or social media. Like I've been dealing, like it's been more this year than ever before, but I've had that slow build of over a decade to get used to it. And with what I've seen, it's like it doesn't matter. I mean, you've got 2 different types of people. You have celebrators and you have haters. And that's what it is. Like you can have someone who, like, I love seeing other people succeed. When I see someone else succeed, if I see someone post online, like, yeah, I just did this, whether it's, I just hit 1 million views on my YouTube channel. I just released my 100th podcast episode. I just got promoted at work. I just started a business, whatever. I'm in there. Congratulations, man. Well done. Like, love it. Love it. It inspires me. I'm like, awesome. Other people are succeeding. You have other people, and I don't even know what the split is. This might even be the majority who see someone else have some kind of success or some sign of looking like success, and their immediate emotional reaction is not to think, oh, well done for that person. If they can do it, I can do it. Their thought is either jealousy, envy, or a feeling that somehow by that person succeeding, instead of taking it as inspiration, this is coming back to that whole billionaire thing, right? It comes
Mm-hmm.
from this idea of, you have people who think that life is zero sum. So by someone else succeeding, they then can't succeed. Whereas it's the opposite. Like people are not poor because billionaires exist. Like people have this idea, and it's a scarily prevalent idea because people don't understand economics, that people are poor because the billionaires are just hoarding all the wealth, right? There's just X amount of money in the world, and
It's nonsense.
these people are just hoarding it, and so no one else can get it. And so all we need to do is like take it off them by force or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, right? Bill Gates having $1 billion takes nothing away from me. In fact, quite the opposite, right? Like there's nothing stopping me from also earning, if I were capable of, and I had the right idea or whatever, I can also earn $1 billion. But it's not like having, okay, you can only have this many and it's going to stop. So people don't understand that the pie is always growing. And so as a result of that, I think that, I mean, it might be some kind of primal instinct, because some things I guess are zero sum. If you've got a certain amount of food, okay, let's say an actual pie, people talk about piece of the pie. If you have an actual pie and you have 8 people and someone literally does eat half of it, then you've only got half left for the other 7 people. So like, that's like, hey man, that's not cool. But that's not how the economy or money or success
No,
in
because
general
other people can make
works.
pies if there's a market for the
Exactly.
pie.
Exactly. You can keep making
Yeah.
pies. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I was going to say, one of the things that I think that a lot of people miss, and the zero sum game kind of thing, is that there's an infinite resource that no one ever talks about. and that's human creativity and
Of course.
ingenuity is unlimited.
Hmm.
We can solve most of our problems. And you know what? You don't even need most people to really be focused on that. I have this kind of magic number in my brain that, my experience is 3% of anybody as the one that's doing everything. 3% of the big creators, 3% of the big thinkers, 3% of the ones that are really changing the world. 97% are along for the ride typically.
Hmm.
But so to me, I don't even care if 97%, I care about helping those 3% make all the difference.
Hmm.
And the difference is the infinite creativity. I just saw a little clip from Bezos. Like, he's the late Bezos and Bill Gates are the big bad guys du jour because politicians are kind of pulling them out. Right.
Yeah.
But it was interesting it was a clip from 97. Right. So it was like Amazon was like 3 years old, and dude, the guy was smart. Right. And, you go look, and he basically, posted it on my Twitter a couple days ago, and it was like looking at, why he wanted to do an online store, because he saw the trend. He knew that this is going to be a big thing. I want to do internet stuff.
Hmm.
He didn't go into the bookstore because he had a passion for books. He picked the books because it had the most number of titles in one industry
Hmm.
that would affect so many other industries. So it was the great place to start. And most people don't know this, but especially these kids that are all communist and they're 20 years old, is that they were a bookstore for like 6 or 7 years, and all they did is books
Yeah, I remember that.
until they, and yeah, not, but it was the 90s, early
Yeah.
2000s. A lot of people don't even know that anymore. They're like, oh, Amazon's at everything. I'm like, no, they started and got traction in one industry, and then they went to the next industry. They disrupted books, and then they disrupted music. And a lot of people don't know that.
Hmm.
And so it's like, but he had a plan, and he's like, this clip is amazing. You should go take a look at it, because it just says, look, we picked this, and this is why we did this. And it's like, dude, that guy didn't get rich by accident. He didn't inherit his money. He was
No,
freaking smart, and he used the creativity, and now he's one of the biggest employers on the planet.
of course.
And so it's like, okay, he just didn't fall into it. And people who don't understand these things are ridiculous. But I know we're getting close on time. I want to hit on one other thing, back to this whole concept of perseverance and being that overlap between artists and entrepreneurs. You've recently released an ebook.
Yep.
And it's called Zuby's Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide for Fitness for Everybody.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit of what made you write a book, and tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about what it's about.
Yeah, sure. So I've been training for actually longer than I've been rapping. I've been going to the gym since I was like 15 years old. Started off not really knowing what I was doing, and then stumbling my way along and really working out what I was doing maybe when I was my 19 or so, or my early 20s, and making good progress, getting stronger, improving my physique, honing my diet, everything like that. And I wanted to basically write a book that would be a simple and concise guide to what people need to know about mindset, nutrition, and training. So it's primarily aimed at beginner to intermediate level, whether people want to build muscle, burn fat, gain weight, lose weight, eat better, feel better, train better. So it's a relatively short book. It's under 100 pages. And I wanted to just lay it out in simple layman's terms of, this is what you need to know, and do away with the stuff that you don't need to know. There's so much confusing, conflicting information and misinformation out there. And nutrition and training are two topics which are actually relatively simple once you really understand the basics. So I wanted to lay out the basics for people in a way that they can really understand it and take that and essentially run with it for life. It's the book that I wish someone had given me when I was 15 and just said, look, just read this, understand these principles, don't get sucked into all the nonsense, and do this. And if you're consistent with it and you work hard, you will achieve whatever goal you are aiming at, in terms of your physique and your health and your strength and so on. So that's really what Strong Advice is. So I put it out there as an ebook initially, and sold well. And then lots of people started asking me for physical copies. So I did a physical run in August, which sold out in a couple of weeks' time. So those all went. And now, as we record this, we're approaching Christmas in 7 weeks. So I'm currently doing the next pre-order for the physical books. And I've also recorded the audiobook version when I was in Nashville. And there will be an audiobook version coming as well in the next couple of weeks. I narrated it myself. I'm a rapper, so I figured I had to. So it'll be available on ebook, physical, and audiobook. So that is Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody.
Where can they get the book?
The book is available on my website, teamzuby.com. And if you wanted to get the physical copy right now, the best place to look is just if you go on my Twitter, at Zuby Music, Zuby Music, then I've currently got the physical book pre-order available there. I will put it on my website as well. That's a good reminder. But at the moment for the ebook, yeah, teamzuby.com, and the physical, you can get that via the link on my Twitter.
Zuby, I've had a really great conversation with you today, and I do appreciate your time. And, I've really enjoyed your message, and I think what you're putting out there is really good, positive stuff. And I want you to keep up with it, man. You're doing some really killer stuff.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.